welcome to my channel. My name's Kedavan and I'm going to be doing something that I think I haven't seen yet on Booktube. I'm calling it book pairings. So two books that I think go together for kind of random or thematic reasons. I might turn it into a series, we'll see how it goes, but I have 6 books, so 3 different pairs here, and I'll just tell you about them. So for the first pair I have here is The White Girl by Tony Birch, as well as Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. So Born a Crime is the memoirs of Trevor Noah. He is a comedian who was born in South Africa during apartheid, and he has a white Swiss father and a black Xhosa mother. So that was illegal. So that's why the book is called Born a Crime. So his parents weren't allowed to be together, and his existence was proof that they were together. So he kind of had to spend most of his childhood hidden away, or, you know, under the radar, so that people didn't notice that he was a mixed race child, with either a black or white family, because then that would sort of be an indicator. So similarly, The White Girl is the story of a young girl who is very light-skinned because she has a white father, and at that period in Australian history, police authorities were given permission to take light-skinned children from their Aboriginal families to integrate them into white society. So this is a threat that hangs over our protagonist, who's her grandmother and her caretaker. It looms over her head, and she is working really hard to prevent that from happening. So that's sort of the premise of both books. And so for obvious reasons, I mean, they both are, you know, mixed race protagonists, and that the issues that causes them. But despite that these two stories have a lot of differences, so they're on completely different continents, totally different decades, the white supremacy that sort of infects British colonization is apparent in both of these stories. So it's a really interesting way of exploring how that plays out in different settings. And also, more importantly, I think, is the role of mothers. So if you've read either of them, you know that, like, the mothers in these stories play a huge role. I don't want to spoil anything, but Trevor Noah's life is great because of his mother. I'll just leave it at that. And same thing with The White Girl. Without her grandmother protecting her, she would have definitely been taken and subjected to plenty of abuse very quickly. But it's because her grandmother stood up for her and protected her that's why she was able to live her life the way she did. So it's a really interesting exploration on how, you know, the white fathers, I mean, Trevor Noah's father didn't abandon him, but he certainly wasn't present during his childhood as much as you would expect. And of course, in The White Girl, the father never even acknowledges it. So it's very much an exploration of mothers of color and what they're doing to protect their children. And for The White Girl, it's her grandmother, but same idea. And I really, really loved both of them, and they really just go together thematically, and I just really love the idea of them together. So that's my first pairing. So continuing with that theme of motherhood, but moving on to a new pair, we have The Snow Child by Eowyn, Ivey, and Chouette by Oshetsky. This one's a little bit newer, and it's it's a magical realism story about a baby owl who's born to human parents, and everyone around the mother is telling her that she needs to fix her baby owl and make the baby owl more human. It's a metaphor for autism, and it's a very, very interesting story about motherhood and accepting your child for who they are. And so similarly with The Snow Child, we have Jack and Mabel, who are homesteaders in Alaska during the 1920s, and they are childless, meaning they really want children, but they can't have any. So they are just living their quiet lives, a little bit sad that they can't have children. And one day they see in the woods a little girl running around barefoot in the snow, and they're very worried, but she keeps running away every time they try to catch her. And so eventually they just, you know, let her come to them, and they learn a little bit about her, and they find out that, or rather, they don't really ever truly find out, but they sort of figure out where she comes from, and the husband really believes that she comes from an actual place and she's human. whereas the wife believes that she was sent to them to be their child. And so, you know, we're never sure as the reader if she is actually coming from where the father thinks she's coming from, or if she is magical, because she's really both. You know, like no child can just like wander in the woods barefoot and not, you know, succumb to the elements. So it's very much like what is happening. You're never sure, you know, what's real, what's not. And so that like exploration of motherhood from Mabel's perspective of desperately wanting to cling to this child who every winter comes to their house and spends time with them, but she cannot stand the heat. So in the summertime, she goes up into the mountains where it's colder, where she can survive. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to live in the summer weather in Alaska. And so Mabel, she has to learn to let go and really, you know, accept her, you know, snow child, they call her, for who she is and what she can bring into their lives, as opposed to, you know, what she wants out of a child. So it's a very interesting look at that. And similarly, with Chouette, like the baby owl is a vicious animal. It's a predator. You know, she doesn't think like a human, she thinks like a baby owl. And so she, you know, wants to hunt, and she wants to eat raw meat, and she wants to, you know, make a mess, and she doesn't want to be toilet trained, and all these things that like are very difficult for parents of autistic children to deal with. You know, our protagonist is dealing with that through the baby owl. And again, a lot of mothers of, and parents in general, but mothers especially of autistic children, it's a process to let go of what you expected of your child when they were born. And so these two are about mothers and, you know, how you relate to your children and what your expectations are of your children. But more than anything, they're about letting go of those expectations and loving your child for who they are, kind of no matter what. So I found both of these very powerful, and I think they would go really nicely together. So that's the Snow Child and Chouette. And then moving away from motherhood a little bit, we have The Bell Jar, Sylvia Plath, very well known. And then This Close to Okay by Leesa Cross-Smith. So The Bell Jar, just really quickly, if you don't know, it's the autofiction of Sylvia Plath's younger years during university, where she had a little bit of a mental health crisis, and she, you know, the character slash Sylvia Plath dealt with a lot of sexism and sexual assault, and lots of terrible things happened to her, but ultimately she ended up in a mental institution being treated with electroshock therapy and a lot of, like, you know, typical treatments for that time era, but from our perspective today, pretty extreme. And so it's that story. And This Close to Okay is about Tally and Emmett. So Tally is a therapist who's just gotten divorced, and she's driving along one day at night, and she sees a man about to jump off a bridge. So she stops and she wants to talk him off the bridge, and that's Emmett. And I don't want to spoil this too much, but Emmett is definitely feeling mentally unwell because of oppression. So he's a black man, and I won't go into the details, but essentially he's faced quite a bit of injustice, and he definitely needs to grapple with that, but he feels like he doesn't have the capacity to do so, so that's why he's reaching for suicide. And so Tally talks him down off the bridge, and she brings him home to her apartment, and they spend the weekend together just talking, and she's afraid to tell him she's a therapist because she doesn't want him to think she's therapizing him, even though she is, because she's a therapist. And they essentially connect, and he finally feels whole enough to move forward on his journey. So it's a very nice book to read on its own, for sure, but I thought it'd be super interesting to pair along with The Bell Jar, because The Bell Jar, everyone reads it as this very sad book, and I get why, because obviously we know that Sylvia Plath died by suicide much later after this book, you know, was over. She'd already married and had children. But this book ends on a quite positive note. You know, she feels well, she feels capable of moving forward. She feels like her mental health treatment helped her, and she's ready to go. She goes on and lives her life, both, we presume, in the fictionalized version, and also Sylvia Plath. Like, she married and had children. She, you know, was living a life. I mean, granted, obviously her mental health issues don't disappear, and she later in life deals with them again, but at this point in her life, it's a positive turning point. And so I think most people read it through the lens of her entire life, in the sense that she didn't actually overcome it permanently, but you know, with mental health, I don't think it's important to overcome things permanently because you really can't. So it's more important to focus on today and what we can do for your immediate future to live your life as well as possible. So that's why I thought of this as a much more positive book than I think most people read it as. But, you know, when I read this book, I don't read it as someone just with mental illness. She's obviously extremely mentally ill and has that to deal with, but it is certainly not helped by the patriarchal society that she is living in and the oppression that she has to deal with as a woman. So of course she's a rich white woman in America. It's not like she, you know, is the apex of oppression or anything, but you know, she has to deal with a lot of different things that, you know, men certainly don't have to deal with. And I think part of what I really liked about this story is that, you know, the people who helped her along the way were women, and the medical care team that she had that were made up of women were much more helpful to her, and that sort of like message of solidarity and understanding was really important, and I think very rare at that time. She even the protagonist says in the book, like, wow, I have a woman psychiatrist, like that's unheard of. I think this was set in the 50s or something, like, which it was very difficult for a woman to become a psychiatrist in the 50s. And the same thing happens in This Close to Okay, you know, like, I mean, I'm sure Emmett had access to mental health care, but did he have access to mental health care from a fellow Black person? I don't know. They didn't really comment on that, but I think that ability to connect with someone who can identify with the problems that aren't necessarily just your mental health, but rather, you know, your sense of community or your sense of oppression, or, you know, your understanding of the world, that is way more powerful, I think, than just like a good doctor who like knows what medicine to prescribe, you know, because both, you know, Tally and the therapist in the bell jar, they both, you know, help in ways that are not traditional, that are not like the Western model of help. You know, like Tally is a therapist, but she's not sitting in an office with him once a week. She brings him to her home, and she, you know, realizes that he needs a human connection. And while, you know, the psychiatrist in the bell jar does see her in an office in the institution, I won't spoil it. Should I spoil it? Yeah, if you haven't read The Bell Jar, it's fine. This isn't a huge piece, but one of the things that, you know, she discusses with her therapist is that, you know, she feels very constrained because she wants to sexually explore, but she's terrified of becoming pregnant because she doesn't want to become a wife, you know, before she finishes university and can establish herself. So she just, you know, feels this like, you know, this repression on her sexuality because she's refusing to put herself at risk for pregnancy. And so birth control was illegal at that time, and that's why she felt like this. And so the psychiatrist said, yeah, you know what, we can fix that. Let me give you the number of a doctor who will give you what I interpreted as a diaphragm. And she got a diaphragm illegally from this doctor that, you know, this network of doctors where it's like, yeah, we'll just give women, you know, what they want instead of what the law dictates. You know, they were going outside their scope of practice. And so I think both books did a really good job of exploring, you know, like, yes, there's treatment protocols and standard ways of doing things to help people, but also we really need to look at like outside of what that actually dictates and what maybe the person really needs. So anyway, I thought, you know, this is a bit unconventional, like very different characters, very different settings, but those two themes really spoke out to me. So I think they would be enjoyed together or close by. So those are my 3 book pairings that I have to share with you today. Please let me know, what did you think of this? Would you like to see more book pairings? If you've had any book pairings that have like kind of naturally happened in your reading life, please let me know. And I think this is actually more common than people realize it, because, you know, when you're thinking about a book that you're really enjoying, you're more naturally likely to pick up a similarly themed book, even if you're not super conscious of it. So if that's ever happened to you, please put it down below. And also, even if they're not together and you read them like 6 months apart or whatever, and you noticed the connection that you think would be particularly interesting, I'm curious to hear about those as well. So anyway, I hope to hear all these good suggestions, and until next time, bye.